Unsolved murders are difficult for everyone involved, the police, the victims' families, and the public, especially when cases go decades without resolution. But luckily, with advancements in DNA technology, more and more cold cases are being solved every year. Here are 5 cold cases that have been solved in 2022. Sophie Sergey. Sophie Sergey was born in 1973 in rural Pitkas Point, Alaska, which was a territory of the Yup'ik people and sits along the Yukon River. Sophie's initial dream was to join the Navy, but since she stood at only 4'9", she didn't qualify for her desired position. Instead, she decided to attend college and study marine biology, since she loved whales and wanted to work with them. She was the first in her family to attend college, set on building a better life for herself and her family. Sophie got a scholarship to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the move was quite the culture shock for her. The university was a 5-hour flight from her village and much more urban than her hometown. She found comfort within the Rural Student Services organization, where she met a friend, Shirley Wasuli. In 1992, Sophie took a leave from school to receive jaw surgery and orthodontic work for her overbite. But since she had to work at a job in Pitkas Point to receive their health insurance, she would board a flight every few months back to Fairbanks for her treatment and appointments. Her friend Shirley had a dorm on a girls-only floor at UAF's campus, so Sophie would stay there when she was in Fairbanks to save money. And on April 24th, 1993, they did just that. It was a Saturday, and Shirley and Sophie had lunch, ran some errands, and hung out at the dorm. By Sunday, Shirley was preparing for final exams and did some schoolwork. According to Shirley, Sophie had plans to attend a movie with some friends. That night, after Sophie went to the movie and Shirley did some studying, they met up at the dorm where Shirley's boyfriend, Noah, ordered pizza for the group. By around 1 a.m., they decided to call it a night. As was usual when Sophie stayed over, Shirley gave her the dorm to herself while she stayed in Noah's dorm. Before Shirley and Noah left, Sophie asked if there was anywhere she could go to smoke a cigarette. That night, it was below freezing, so Shirley told Sophie that she can go to the bathroom down the hall since it had vents to suck up the smoke. And with that, Shirley and Noah headed out. Shirley noted that there were a few people still in the hallway, including a man she didn't recognize. She locked eyes with him, but wouldn't realize who he was until decades later. On the morning of April 26, Shirley returned to her dorm. She was, admittedly, a bit annoyed finding the door unlocked, the bed still made, and the TV and lights still on. She assumed that Sophie had already gotten up and ready for the day. She went to the shared bathroom located on that floor and called out to the closed shower stalls, "Sophie, are you here?" Someone responded, "Yeah, I'm here." Shirley accepted that response, took a shower, and returned to her dorm, leaving a note for Sophie to give her a call later that day. But when Shirley got home, everything was where she left it, and Sophie had not contacted her. This was when Shirley got worried, asking around to see if anyone had seen Sophie. Shirley even called Sophie's orthodontist that she had an appointment for, but they informed her that Sophie never showed up. While this was happening, students around campus began chatting about a police presence at Bartlett Hall, the dorm building that Shirley lived in. By the time it reached Shirley, she heard everything she needed to know. A body had been found. Shirley rushed back to her building where she was stopped by police, who told her that she couldn't enter. She told the officer that she was looking for a friend, and they began asking questions. The officer followed Shirley and Noah into Shirley's dorm, asking questions along the way. One state trooper found Sophie's ID in the room and recognized her. She was the girl whose body they found in the bathroom. It was a female janitor who was cleaning the shower and bath area that discovered her body. When police arrived, they noticed she had been badly injured, and the positioning of her clothing indicated that the crime was sexually motivated. Investigators began by interviewing everyone on the floor. Since Sophie's attack happened earlier in the hours of the morning, most students who were interviewed reported being in bed, therefore not seeing or hearing anything unusual. It was surprising that no one had witnessed a man exiting the bathroom on an all-female floor, which would certainly draw attention. But it turns out that wasn't all too unusual to see men in the bathrooms on all-female floors. Men who were partying at dorms on the all-female floors would sometimes use the bathrooms to avoid going up to the male-only floors. UAF had recently had some budget cuts, which led to diminished security measures in dorm halls, and there was no regulation of who was on each floor at any given time. Though investigators did everything they could to find Sophie's killer, years passed without answers until December of 2018, 25 years after the murder, when investigators got a call from a genetic genealogist. They were told that they formed a profile from the DNA collected at the crime scene. They used the profile to trace a family tree until they identified a match. The killer was Stephen Harris Downs. The identification led investigators all the way to Maine, where 44-year-old Downs was arrested and charged with Sophie's murder. When Maine State Police and Alaska State Troopers interviewed Downs, they found out that in 1992, he was enrolled at UAF and lived in Bartlett Hall. He and his roommates had been interviewed when the body was initially found, and he reported that he didn't have any significant information. In 2019, he said the same thing, that he remembered a girl was murdered in his dorm building, but that he didn't know much else. According to Downs, he was staying on the 4th floor with his girlfriend that night, and he was adamant that he hadn't ever been on the 2nd floor. He suggested that the killer might have been a soldier from nearby Fort Wainwright and that they were known to party in Bartlett Hall. Investigators needed a direct comparison to connect Downs to the case since he wasn't going to confess, but he never had any previous charges or convictions that would require him to submit DNA. So police executed a search warrant that included a cheek swab, and it was a match. And just like that, on February 15, 2019, Stephen Downs was charged with the first-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault of Sophie Sergey, and in February of 2022, after deliberating for 20 hours, a jury found Downs guilty of Sophie's murder. He will have a sentencing hearing on September 26th and 27th. Investigators don't believe that Downs knew Sophie before the murder. Lucille Holtgren. 79-year-old Lucille Holtgren lived in Galt, California with her husband Frank for 25 years, and they were known to be extremely kind and welcoming. Lots of the neighborhood kids said that the couple would always have their doors open for them, offering them cookies and lemonade in the summer. Just a few months before Lucille's murder, Frank passed away due to Alzheimer's, but Lucille remained an active member at the First Methodist Church and in her local community. So when Lucille didn't attend church on May 22, 1988, her friends grew worried and decided to check on her. They entered her home through a sliding glass door that was found partially opened and made a gruesome discovery. They found Lucille's dead body in her bedroom. She had been stabbed, strangled, and sexually assaulted, but there were no signs of forced entry into her home. Lucille's autopsy revealed that she had been dead for 2 to 5 days before her body was found. Multiple agencies were involved in the case. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office collected evidence from the scene, and the California Department of Justice collected fingerprints. They tried everything they could, but the amount of DNA they collected was so small that there was not enough that could be done at the time, and the case eventually went cold. It wasn't until January of 2022 when the Sacramento County Crime Lab re-examined the DNA evidence collected that a match was finally made. They examined scrapings from under Lucille's fingernails and bodily fluids found on her bedding, and a match was made to Terry Leroy Bramble. Bramble was 32 years old at the time of the murder, and he was never a suspect on police radar. His DNA was on file in a database due to a sexual assault conviction from 1992. He was a transient in the Galt area for years, but he died of natural causes in October of 2011. At the time of his death, he was homeless, living in the area under a bridge on Highway 99. Police say they are working with other nearby jurisdictions to determine whether Bramble may be responsible for other unsolved cases. Police still don't know what the motive may have been for Bramble to kill Lucille, or if the two ever come in contact with each other. But Lucille's surviving son who was now the age that his mom was when she died, says that just knowing the identity of who killed his mother is enough closure after 34 years. LEE ROTATORI. LEE was born on September 29, 1949 in North Dakota. She was the oldest of 4 siblings and grew up all throughout the Midwestern United States. As a child, she loved art and horses, and as an adult, she was finally able to have a horse of her own. She received a bachelor's degree in dietary services from the University of Wisconsin and went on to get a master's degree in food and nutrition. On November 14, 1970, she married Anthony Rotatori, and they went on to have a son named Michael. In 1977, the couple got a divorce, and Michael lived in Chicago with his dad. LEE went on to marry a man named Jerry Nemke in August of 1978, but she kept her last name from her first marriage to Anthony. LEE and Jerry got a divorce in 1979, but remarried in December of 1981. In 1982, LEE moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa for a job as a food service director at a hospital. When she first arrived in Council Bluffs, she checked into room 106 at a Best Western motel, where she planned to stay until Jerry met her there with their mobile home. On Monday, June 21st, LEE began orientation for her new job. That Thursday, she went boating with some friends she met at work. In the evening, they left the lake, stopped at McDonald's, then LEE headed back to the motel. The next day, Friday the 25th, a motel employee found LEE in her room, lying on her bed, dead. It appeared that she'd been deceased for about 12 hours before she was found, and she had a single stab wound. There were no signs of forced entry into the room, and there didn't appear to be a struggle. But investigators did find evidence that LEE had been sexually assaulted. One of the detectives on the case told the public that some items had been stolen from LEE's motel room, such as her purse and jewelry, but he informed that police did not believe robbery was the motive. Since the motel was located right off 2 large interstates, and around 12 hours had passed since the crime had occurred, investigators realized that the perpetrator could be anywhere by now. Police's first suspect was LEE's husband, Jerry, because of his criminal record. In 1960, when Jerry was 17 years old, he was arrested in Chicago and questioned about the killing of 3 women and fatal beating of another woman. When he was apprehended for questioning in the beating, he was driving a stolen car. He admitted to the attack and ended up being convicted and sentenced to death. Not even 2 years later, the Illinois Supreme Court ended up overturning his conviction due to a technicality in the way his preliminary hearing was conducted. He was tried again and sentenced to 75 years, but it's unclear how he ended up being released. In spite of this, police claimed that Jerry had a solid alibi for the night of LEE's death, and he was ruled out as a suspect. The hospital that LEE had just begun work at and the Best Western where she was both staying, both donated $1,000 for a reward for anyone who could give information that would lead to her killer, but the case went cold. In 2001, investigators submitted the evidence collected at the crime scene to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Lab to take another look. They identified a male DNA profile, but it didn't match anyone in any databases. Over the next few years, they would continue to test this DNA against the samples in databases, but no matches were made. In 2018, Council Bluffs police submitted the DNA to Parabon, figuring that the only way they could solve the case after so many years would be through genetic genealogy. By early 2021, they had made a match to the DNA. It belonged to Thomas Freeman. Lab then analyzed a sample from DNA from Freeman's daughter to confirm this, and they found that there was a parent-child relationship between the DNA from the crime scene and the DNA from Freeman's daughter. In the February of 2022, the Council Bluffs Police Department announced their findings. Only 4 months after Lee's death, 35-year-old Freeman's body was found in a shallow grave in Illinois. It seemed that he had been there for about 3 months before he was discovered, and he had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. His killer was never identified, but police are reinvestigating it to see if it has any potential connections to Lee's murder. Lee's husband, Jerry, died in 2019 before he ever found out who killed his wife. Lisa Fracassi. Lisa Fracassi was born in New Jersey in 1958, and she had dreams of becoming a nurse. One of her friends, Renee, told a news outlet she was a caring person like a nurse who would sit for hours with people who needed help. In 1987, she was living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and working in a hospital. One night, she was driving with a 49-year-old man and had her first and only run-in with the law. They were pulled over by police for a broken tag light, but Lisa was arrested since she was also driving with a suspended license. While the police were arresting her, they noticed cocaine residue in the vehicle and searched the car, finding 1.5 kilos of cocaine and 28 grams of marijuana. Because of this, she was also charged with possession of cocaine with intent to sell, felony possession of marijuana, possession of drug paraphernalia, and trafficking cocaine in excess of 400 grams. By 1990, it seemed like Lisa had put this incident behind her. She moved to Hawaii and began working as an exotic dancer in an effort to make enough money to put herself through nursing school. In the beginning of October 1994, she had just broken up with her boyfriend. They had dated for about 7 months before their breakup, and he worked as a police officer for the Honolulu Police Department. According to Lisa's closest friend, Renee, she remained friendly with him, and it was by no means a bad breakup. By the end of the month, Lisa had started seeing someone new. On Wednesday, October 27th, Lisa didn't show up for work, and coworkers became worried when she also doesn't show up the following Thursday and Friday. In an interview with police, Lisa's boss said that on Friday she called him and told him that she was quitting and had plans to work for another club. But the next day, Saturday the 30th, she called him back and asked if she could come in to work. She worked that night until 2 a.m., which would be the last time she was seen alive. She was scheduled to work Tuesday, but never showed up. Her boss called her to check in, but she didn't answer. He called again on Wednesday and Thursday when she still didn't show up for work, but again, he got no response. That Thursday, the housekeeper at the hotel Lisa was living in stopped by her room to drop off clean linens, but there was a Do Not Disturb sign hanging on her door handle. Hotel staff reported that they'd seen this sign on her door for days in a row at this point, since that past Saturday. The housekeeper knocked on the door and received no response. Since the Do Not Disturb sign had been there so long, she entered the room. That's when she discovered Lisa's bruised body. The medical examiner determined that she had likely been deceased for 4 days when she was found and died as a result of strangulation. From there, investigators got to work to find her killer. Lisa's ex-boyfriend was given a polygraph test, which he passed. The police collected some evidence from the scene, and luckily, just a year before in 1993, Honolulu police began using a new, more effective method of storing DNA. But after a while, the case went cold. The next development wasn't until the year 2000, when John Eric Armstrong, a sailor in the Navy, was suspected of Lisa's murder. He had been linked to the deaths of some sex workers in the 90s when he was stationed around the country. The lead was promising, but he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. The next development in the case happened in 2016, when the Honolulu Police Department set up a cold case unit called the Aoli Poinia Project, which means never forgotten. In March of 2020, HPD took another look at the fingerprints and DNA taken from the crime scene. They sent the DNA to Parabon Nanolabs to try and get a snapshot of what the perpetrator may look like based on his DNA. When this happened, well-known genetic genealogist C.C. Moore took a look at the case, and just like that, a DNA match was made. Cecil Trent was identified as a suspect. Cecil Trent was 29 years old when Lisa died. According to his family, Trent died from congestive heart failure in 2013 at the age of 48. At the time of his death, he still lived in Honolulu and he had 3 children. After he died, his fingerprints were taken and they matched the ones found at the crime scene. After confirming by fingerprint match and DNA match, this case was considered solved in April of 2022. EMMA CALDWELL. In April 2005, 27-year-old Emma Caldwell was working as a sex worker in Glasgow's red light district. she had been struggling with drug addiction since her older sister passed away from cancer. As a child, she loved horses and was known to be kind and considerate. Her family called her Emmy J, short for Emma Jane. She was last seen alive in the early morning hours of April 5th, and her loved ones reported her missing 5 days later. On May 8th, her body was found in the woods, 40 miles from where she was last seen. She was found without clothes, and she had been strangled. A woman named Anna Wallace runs a support group in Glasgow named Salt and Light. The group acts as a support system for people, including sex workers, who are struggling in any way. Just days before her death, Emma had gone to Anna to speak about a troublesome customer who had been causing her to feel unsafe. Other sex workers who knew Emma reported that one man in particular, Ian Packer, was obsessed with her. Ian Packer was a regular client of Emma's, and he was on police radar early on due to his history of domestic violence and aggression towards women. At least 4 other sex workers in the area came forward to police and said that Ian had taken them to the same remote forest where Emma's body was found. He was interviewed 6 times between the years of 2005 and 2007, and he was always adamant he never hurt Emma, even saying that he's never hurt a woman in his life. And he was ultimately ruled out as there was not enough evidence to charge him with anything. Then, 2 years after Emma's death, police arrested and charged 4 Turkish men who were involved in a large-scale undercover operation. At 11:20 p.m. on April 4th, 2005, the day that Emma was last seen alive, she received a phone call. The call lasted only 76 seconds, but it was traced to a Turkish man living in Glasgow by the name of Abu Bakir Onkul. Around the time of Emma's disappearance, he had left Scotland to travel back to Turkey, which raised red flags for police. When he returned, police contacted him and he voluntarily gave interviews and provided DNA samples. Despite this, police bugged his house and interviewed a former girlfriend of Onku's, who said that he was controlling. Not long after Onku was interviewed, a sex worker in the area told police that she had been sexually assaulted by 2 men in a Turkish cafe in Glasgow, and that she knew 2 other women who had also been sexually assaulted there. Police followed these leads and fully turned their attention to Turkish men in the community. Detectives also uncovered that the last ping from Emma's phone was in the vicinity of that cafe. Police searched the cafe and conducted surveillance of it for the following months. In a promising lead, investigators tested a spot of blood on a quilt found in the cafe, and it was positively identified as belonging to Emma. However, this wasn't enough evidence to charge or convict anyone for Emma's death, and this promising trail ended up going cold. Investigators never gave up, though. In 2015, Police Scotland's major investigative team received instructions from the Lord Advocate, one of the senior law officers in Scotland, to dedicate more work to reinvestigating this case. And just this year, police original suspect Ian Packer, now 49 years old, was finally arrested and charged for the murder of Emma Caldwell. He is being accused of 38 charges in total, including some for sexual assault and abductions in unrelated cases. The judge denied his bail, and he did not plead, so he is expected to appear in court over the next few months, where we will learn more about the evidence police uncovered that led to this arrest. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this episode. If you don't want to miss any content coming from this channel, click the subscribe button. And if you want to support this channel, like, share, and leave a comment to let us know what you think of the cases we treated.